Welcome to Smoking Popcorn, where I start the discussion.
Want to know some more fun facts?
Isn't it awesome to see some of your favorite content creators and favorite people, honestly, that you follow here on this app, be a part of this amazing community called the Nerd Initiative?
The Nerd Initiative presents the Comic Press Podcast, hosted by JJ's Comic Stuff.
What is going on, everybody? Hopefully this is working properly. This is episode 1, and it is prone to technical difficulties. This is the Comic Press Podcast from Nerd Initiative. I am your guest, JJ from JJ's Comic Stuff, and today my guest host is Michael Rothman, co-founder of... Well, that's what I was saying. Yeah, my guest host for this evening is Michael Rothman, co-founder of Nerd Initiative. What's going on, man? Yeah. Yeah, man. She can't hear you. How about now?
Let's see if she can hear me now. Nope, just JJ.
Nope, just JJ.
Let's give it a second. I'm texting her. She's texting me.
I know, I'm getting chat notifications already.
This is great.
Once again, guys, first episode, bear with us.
Oh. So, CWK saying my mic's not on. Let's see. I should be on. What? Can you guys hear me?
I'm hearing you just fine.
Turn up the volume. What? Hello?
Can you
so
hear?
it's just super light. I think that's the thing. Let me get my settings.
I'll say I just turned you up on my end, but I don't think I can do any more.
Okay. Oh, so it's working now? Let's see. All right, they said they can hear me better now. Cool.
Okay, cool. All right, let's try that again. Welcome to the Comic Press Podcast, everybody. Gotta love that first episode. Technical difficulties, man.
Content creation at its best, guys.
At its finest.
Oh man. So how is everything going? Everything looks good. I'm watching it third person from YouTube. Everything looks fantastic.
And man, why don't we just jump right into it since we've got everything working so I don't touch anything and break anything else.
Well, let's introduce yourself. Let's get a little intro going for people that don't know JJ. Let's hear your story, and why we're starting this new show.
Well, typical, nerdy, super nerd from childhood. It was, Spider-Man, Power Rangers, X-Men, all of the above when I was little, and then got into school. You kind of have to shelter yourself from it a bit to survive high school. So after that, I kind of fell off for a while, and then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I started getting on TikTok, seeing a whole bunch of other people that were into comic books, and so I said, I can do that. And there's other people that like this stuff, so maybe I can make friends. And that was the entire intention behind it.
That's awesome.
And then now I'm here doing this.
So yeah, for those who don't know, in addition to technical difficulties, I also don't see JJ in real time, so there might be some crisscrossing, but we're just gonna deal with it.
We'll make it work, man.
So people that don't know my story, co-founder of Nerd Initiative, huge comic fan, previous life, loved covering Marvel and even DC. Man, talk about a blast from the past. Marvel and DC and movies and TV, and having a blast, man. JJ's one of the most knowledgeable most passionate comic fans around. So you guys are really gonna love this. It's gonna be a treat, and we're gonna bring you everything you need to know about comics from a bi-weekly basis. Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna try and keep it fun too. We're gonna try to keep it quick moving. Rather, this first episode, like I said, bear with us. We'll get the format down nice and tight, and we'll get it together for sure. Having said all that,
you have that promise from us.
Yeah, we will get our stuff together. I promise. But dude, that auction yesterday we watched. Why don't you kind of talk about that a little bit before I start showing slides and naming prices here?
Yeah, so I think every 2 weeks, I think what we'll do is kind of give you a look at the past, present, and the future, right? I think talk about new comics, talk about old comics, and if we're looking at the past, what a past it was. So Heritage Auctions, which is one of the biggest names in auctions, I think especially when it comes to comic books, they are, in my opinion, move my camera a little bit. In my opinion, they are, I think, the biggest name in, rare and valuable comics. And so, sorry, I got that fixed now, so I'm good. I will say, they're, as of today, so what they're doing is it's their annual, huge auction. And so it's from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of this year, and it's just blue chip stuff. And so as of today, I checked it before we went on here. I think they just crossed, over $10 million. That gives you any idea of what they're, and there's original art involved. I was showing my wife yesterday, which is one of the cooler things. I think it went for 120 grand. They had the, and I mean, it's super ancient too. It's beyond racist and crazy because it's 60 years old. They had the frame for where Tony Stark gets the shrapnel in his heart.
Oh, wow.
Now that's the original art.
Right.
That is not a copy of it, or it's literally original art. And so it's the original art, and it's that there's, to my knowledge, there's only one of one when it comes to stuff like that. And so that went for 120 grand. But like I said, it is, I don't know if you want to display it or not, because it is really.
Oh yeah, I got a slideshow here in just a second. If you want, we can rapid fire because each slide shows up for about 7 seconds.
Okay.
So
yeah.
I went through, marked down a whole bunch of the really cool stuff I thought was most interesting. So first slide, we've got All-Star Comics number 8, which is Wonder Woman's first appearance. 4.5 CGC, $43,200.
That's not bad though. I mean, talk about an incredibly undervalued book, because that's a 1940s book, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the slide's going too fast, but
that's all right. We can always just restart the slides.
Yeah, it's fine. These are these are just an array of the books that were sold. So, Wonder Woman, that's an incredibly undervalued book, which is crazy because it's. It's an 80-year-old book from the 40s.
I was gonna say, I was surprised it went as low as $43,000. Honestly.
Yeah, I saw a while back, I think on Instagram, a 2.5 or 3.5 go for 30. So I think, overall prices have cooled on graded comics a little bit as we kind of head into a questionable 2023. But that one seems to have come down overall, but. The big one was the next one.
The biggest of the entire thing, I think it was, wasn't it?
Yeah. So so when you go, it also needs to be explained too. We were doing this yesterday when we went live on TikTok. When you do a heritage auction, it's not just the bid price one. So if you win something for $100,000, you're essentially going to pay $120 because you pay this buyer's, it's called a BP, a buyer's premium. So it's 20%, and then you usually pay taxes too. So you got to factor all that in.
These are the final prices with the buyer's price added on.
Yeah. So Amazing Fantasy 15, which we all know is Spider-Man's first appearance, a 9.2, which is one of, I thought it would be the best copy in the world. It's one of 15.
There's very, very, very few in that good of condition, and it went for $810,000.
So crazy.
That is insane.
So Well, the Batman one went for what, 600 with the buyer's premium, so it went for 500,000, and then
Yep, $552,000.
yeah, it's just nuts. I mean, I think I think as grading has come about, and we've interviewed Steve Borak before for Nerd Initiative, and like I think one of the pioneers of grading comics, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's separating the masses, right? So you have, again, that Spider-Man is an elite book of, there's if you own that book, you're one of a handful of people of a book, it's the key Silver Age book by far, hands down.
And when it came out, a lot of people wadded it up and put it in their back pocket.
Yeah, well, also like in the 60s, Marvel, it's called Marvel chipping, which is I think that's a big thing. And I've seen books that have higher grades go for less than books at lower grades that don't have Marvel chipping. So for people that don't know, Marvel chipping is in the 60s. These books weren't meant to be kept and saved. They were made of really not quality paper, and the covers over time, not really by wear and tear, just again, it's age. This is 60 years old, Spider-Man 60th anniversary, like they start to chip off. And so you find these older books, and I wish I actually do. Well, that's fine. You can see like it's just little chunks of the edges start to come off. And so a lot of these books, before restoring was looked really down upon, people used to trim the edges to kind of make it better.
Right.
And now restoring really lowers the grade. So again, the 9.2 is huge, but also the fact that the book is like really pristine, and it's just a really hard copy to get. And yeah, it's pretty close to $1 million. I mean, for one comic book that costs like 10 cents. Insane.
Yeah, I think it was 10 cents when it came out in the 60s.
I mean, but if you look, it's funny. There's a thing, and maybe I can go to it right now. If you go to, it's kind of like a short sponsored message. If you go to Shortbox, they have historic, buying data. Of course, I can't talk right now, but so if you go, amazing, I think they have an Amazing Fantasy on there. You can see. So yeah, you said like, oh, it was 10 cents when it came out, but we've seen a real boon in the past 5-10 years with comics. So I mean, someone today was picking up. Yeah, there's a copy on Shortbox. By the way, the easiest and safest way to buy graded comics, Shortbox. Even though we're talking about heritage, you can look at the historic census, and so if you go through, you don't even want to hear this.
Oh God,
you don't want to hear this. So they have listed a 1.0. So if you want to compare, which is really interesting. So here, this is Shortbox, really great app for buying and selling comics. They have a 1.0, Amazing Fantasy 15, listed for 17,000. And then, Shortbox is like any other platform. You can make offers, and you're not gonna, unless you just buy it, you're not gonna automatically spend 17,000. But they also have historical sales data, and so in this data, COVID really has, luxury goods went through the roof when people were staying home, and stimulus checks came into play and whatever. Before COVID, that book in 2019 was going for about 9,000. So you're looking at a double in value. And then if you want to go back 10 years, 2011, that book sold for $2,000.
Holy cow. That is such a gap.
So yeah, I mean, it's now, you have to think about time, right? So 10 years, we're talking about 2011's kind of the beginning of the MCU. Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I remember Tom Holland's Spider-Man, for those that don't know, like, was it 2016 when he was in Civil War? It really, it made Spider-Man cool again. Like, he was back.
Well, and he wasn't even like confirmed cast until after the movie was already being like completely like a damn near finished, from what I understand.
So yeah, so I mean, that kind of stuff really. I mean, I'm afraid to look up like Tales of Suspense 39 before the MCU. I'm sure they were going for.
Man.
nothing. I mean, if you go back, you go all the way back on the data here, they have it in 2005, like $800 for Amazing Factor 15. So, I mean, again, this is time. That's what happens over time. Is
Right.
things, increase in value and price. And so it's nuts. Where things will go from here, I don't know. I mean, I think, again, like I said, there's a separation now. I think people are starting to see they want the real blue chip books. And, if you're a huge fan, you will go. I mean, I don't know. It's tough to spend 20 grand on, a lower end book, but we'll see. We'll see what happens and where things go. But yeah, right now the dollars are crazy.
$192,000 for Flash Comics #1.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I will say that this is the last, this is a story I've told all the time. And this is the last thing I'll tell you about that is, I remember being in college, and sometimes I think I'm kidding myself when I tell this story, but then I looked at the historical data and I know that I'm not. I remember being in college, which is, around that time that the book was going for like $800 or whatever. And seeing what they call reader copies. So reader copies are coverless copies that have been thrown around so much that the cover just came off. Or people just threw them out, because they're like, it's a copy that was, getting your hair cut, or a coffee shop, or
If something got spilled on it or whatever.
Yeah, they're just there for people to read. And there was a coverless copy on eBay. I think it was like a couple $100 max. And those now, those are valuable of Amazing Fantasy 15. Those are like 10 grand. I mean, that one sold on Heritage last week, because I watch Heritage Weekly. It's just fun to watch these things go down. One sold, there was a coverless copy. It was $8,000.
Well, do you remember seeing the #1 from Superman #1 that sold for like, what was it, $7,000 or something?
Oh, man.
It was just literally somebody had taken a box cutter or an X-Acto knife and cut out the #1 off the cover, and it got that graded.
Yeah.
And it sold for like $7 grand.
That's the problem. That's the problem. So I think that's the thing that people are concerned about, with this stuff. And this is stuff that we can get into, in the future of the show, like really get into, like, what's the future of comics? Like, I know you're a big fan. I know we have a lot of friends that are, and again, I say this without, we're all about, inclusivity and welcoming people, but a lot of people are worried about like the business of it and the influencer aspect. There's a lot of people on Instagram, and I've found really good things from it. Again, I think there's a lot of people that collaborate with Shortbox that are great people, that I guess are considered influencers, like that are on there that we know we're friends with. And I think they're comic fans. They're great people for the hobby. You do have some businesses, and I think that's a perfect example, cutting out the one from Action Comics 1 and selling that's stupid. I mean, come on, that's like, I mean, it's cool to have, but I think like it just goes beyond what the hobby's supposed to be about.
Right. Well, like, I want to know is like, either why did you cut that out of a complete cover, or where did you just randomly find a #1?
You know what it might be? So Sanderson Studios on Instagram is a really good restorer / conserver. And I think he just, he takes restoration off and like fixes books up. And this is the opposite side of that coin. He was doing these auctions. I think it was for a foundation or a charity. And he has all these extra parts that come from taking restoration out. So a lot of people glue on things, and like, amateur restoration, there's something called color touch, where you're basically markering up like a faded cover, and that's restoration, or trimming, or glue, or whatever it is. Tape on the cover is considered restoration to some degree. And he was selling these little vials of really cool things. And I think it had bits and pieces from Action 1 and bits and pieces from Batman 1, and like things that he had gotten, and this guy's kind of like almost like a high-end art restoration.
Right.
That goes into like, he's the gold standard. Like I watch him and I live for his posts, because he shows you the progress of like doing these incredibly iconic things that we'll never ever, we might never handle, like a Batman 1 or whatever.
Right.
And he was trying to make money off those scraps for a charity. So again, the epitome of what it should be about, right? He's a huge fan. He cares about the hobby, and he just had these vials of like, glue and bits, and I think he had some bits that came from Marvel Comics 1, which is nuts and valuable. And so he did this thing. It was like $200-300 per little plastic vial filled with these little bits, and he was like, look, they're just little fun things if you're a comic fan, but all the proceeds are going to this charity. And so he did it, and so that I think that might be where it came from. But some guy got or woman or whoever got their hands on it, or person got their hands on it, and then graded it and sold it. And it's just,
how would you even mail that to get graded? It's so small.
I don't know.
Like,
I will say there's another thing that too, like we were talking about this week. I was talking with a friend, that coverless copy of Amazing Fantasy 15. I've seen pages. Our friend Batman was looking to buy a page from Batman 1. Like, you can buy pages if you can't afford the entire book or the coverless book or a complete book or whatever. You can buy wraps, which are sections of the book, and you can also buy pages. And I've seen the splash page of Amazing Fantasy 15, which is the classic. Wish I could pull up a photo. The classic iconic photo of like the dorky Peter Parker, and people are making fun of him, and it's like the coming of Spider-Man is like the big first page.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that go for $2,000, just that page, and that's not even a grade. Someone just cut it, sent it in, or ripped it off, sent it in, and they're not going to grade it. And it just says PG is the designation for page. And if you don't want to spend $15,000 for the whole book, you could just buy the page. And so that might be also someone that took apart that book, which I still wouldn't do to an Action Comics 1. Like,
right.
Only great. That's the
like, it's not a car. You can't piece it out and make
higher than an Action 1. You can put it on par with Detective 27, but I mean that's still not even as valuable as Action 1. So I don't know. We can look up the story behind it at some point, but I'm sure.
I would say that's definitely worth a little bit of research later on down the line for sure.
Yeah. It's so crazy. So that was the auction. It is still going on, so I'm sure it'll go well above. The art was incredible. I mean, we were caught off guard. We thought, I was like, oh, it's going for like $80,000. It's like a page of original art. It was the entire book, so page like 1 through 22 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's a nutty, crazy.
And that one went for like 400-something thousand.
Well, yeah, it's the whole book.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think I always go to my friend Kofi, who's a collector of all different kinds of things, and he always says, like, think about what you'll never be able to get. That's value, like that you are one of one. So I think about that Iron Man page, which I think it's not him in the Iron Man costume, but
I mean, there's only one concept art page for that. There's only one original artwork piece for that. So,
and whoever has it, that's worth $1 million. Like the first image of Iron Man as Iron Man breaking it, that's literally priceless. So I think I look at it as like the page where he's getting the shrapnel in his heart, and we all know the story behind Tony Stark. Like, that's pretty iconic. It's so I actually think of something like that for $120,000. To me, that feels like somewhat of a deal. If you're a huge Iron Man fan, you are never going to have another opportunity to get that piece of iconic art. So, it's
right.
Things like that, I think, are historic. I think when people are cutting out numbers and selling that for crazy amounts of money, that's just silly. And it's like we said, it's really bad for the hobby.
Yeah, because there's only so many things to take scraps off of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's next? What's the next topic?
Next topic is our top 5 reads of 2022. Since we are now in 2023, I figured it would be cool to go over the 5 favorite things we read last year.
Nice.
So
they have to be. So here, let's lay down the ground rules. Do they have to be of 2022? Because I was reading a lot.
No, because one of mine is from 2021, but I read it last year.
Okay. I was going to make a joke and be like, you're really breaking the rules there. I was reading stuff of like Secret Wars. You're like, I was from December 2021, so I threw it in there.
Nah, trust me, it's all good, man. So this isn't in any kind of particular order or anything like that, but the first one I've got is right here. It's called "Do a Power Bomb" by Daniel Warren Johnson. He's doing the art and the writing. He's calling it his passion project. So basically, the main character's name is Lana Steele Rose, and her mother was a professional wrestler who died in the ring. And so she is now trying to break into the wrestling business, but nobody wants to train her to actually become pro because of what happened to her mom. So she ends up meeting this wrestling promoter, quote unquote, named the Necromancer, who invites her to a tag team tournament in another dimension as a way to try and bring her mom back. It is one of the coolest stories you will read, I promise, especially if you're any kind of professional wrestling fan, like even a little bit. This is like one of the best things that's come out in forever that has to do with wrestling.
That's really cool. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to be on par with that synopsis and review. It's really, really well done. We're going to clip that off.
I'll say I'm not going to do that with all of them
so
because we're trying to keep this kind of short today, but that one I had to get into because, yeah, that was one of my favorite underrated ones that slipped by a lot of people last year.
That was really, really good. I actually want to read that now. And I think, you know, Diesel Dan's the guy that really brings us into, you and him really give us into like these new books that otherwise I wouldn't know of. And he really gets indie, which is really cool. So
yeah, me and him have had quite a few conversations talking about like those super random indie stuff we read.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I'm going to, do you want me to add mine in, or do you have another one to go?
No, go right ahead, man.
I mean, like I said, I was going through, it's funny how much comics have evolved in like 20, 30 years. And like the indie stuff is like really incredible. We could always talk about Something Is Killing the Children. And I feel like that's probably in your top 5 because that's a great book as well. But
it's actually, well, sort of, but we'll get into that.
But I've been reading, I've been trying to, like, you know, like I think I did it years ago and it was super fun when Infinity War was announced. I went back and kind of reread all the Infinity Gauntlet / Infinity War books, which are just nuts because they they're so crazy, and all the guessing game on the MCU of like what they were going to be, and like everyone was completely off, and it was so much better than we thought it was going to be when we saw Endgame. I have gone back and started reading Secret Wars, and I think I've recently had read the newer, you know, one that was a couple years ago from Hickman, and then I was reading the ones from like the 80s and 90s, and yeah, they're bizarre, and it's so funny. And I think the one thing that really solidifies though is that Doctor Doom is definitely going to be the main villain, I think, in this, because he literally is the main in both of them, and like I think that's a lock, you know, no matter what you think or where you stand. But I will say it's just cool, like it's fun too. It is also, there's a carefree thing about it where, you know, you're reading like the Hulk like holding up like that tons of granite as they've just been attacked by. And if people that don't know the premise, I'm not going to be able to explain it as well as JJ did just recently, but you know, it's essentially, for the original one, the Beyonder comes in and he's, you know, he's destroyed all the multiverse. It's sent this one planet, which is like Battle World, and he's taken all the heroes. It's literally like what, as a kid, what you would come up in your mind. Like, it's like the heroes versus the villains, winner takes all. You're like, and now you're reading it, you're like, oh man, it's so funny because it's iconic, but it's also freeing too, because it's just fun and it takes you back to like a childhood like state. So reading those has been fun and it has been a blast, and that's been, I think, one of my top reads. And I started reading it late last year, and I've been kind of taking my time through them and just kind of going through and trying to make guesses and theories on what we're going to see in a couple of years in the MCU. So that's been one that I've been going through.
Heck yeah, man. And it's one of those that's like, that story ages well. Not every comic run does.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like there's some 90s stuff we just won't even bring up right now, but
Oh, I mean the 90s in general is just hilarious with like the belts and the muscles and
just the unrealistic anatomy. Like not even like I get it, superheroes they got to be a little bit bigger, you know, but like the extra added musculature on every character, like muscles that do not exist.
yeah. And I don't get into the whole politics of everything either, but like the objectification of women is nuts. And you don't I don't think you realize it when you're a kid.
Well, no, not when you're a kid because you're not paying attention to that stuff. You know, you're just reading the superhero story. But
the outfits are just like, and I think it was good to see what was recently done. Because like when you had X-Men, the Bryan Singer one, where like Psylocke was, I think that outfit was just ridiculous and silly. Like it's just silly. And what was recently was done where people were worried about it, and it ended up being really well done. I forgot what character it was. It wasn't. Was it She-Hulk? I don't think so. I don't know. I can't think of it now. But it was someone that, and you were like, when the actual costume came out and they actually did, you're like, good job. Like it's regular. It's not crazy. It's
right.
Not crying and whatever. Like. And the thing that what Age of Apocalypse or X-Men Apocalypse was only what, like 6-7 years ago, maybe.
Yeah,
and
something like that.
That outfit was not. I mean, I remember seeing it at the time, and I was like, "This is I feel a little weird about this."
Right, like I feel weird reading this. Like,
yeah. So yeah, it's crazy. What's your next one?
All right, my next one is from Marvel, and it's actually Demon Days by Peach Momoko and Zach Davison. So I know a lot of people probably know Momoko for her cover art, but this was the first thing that Marvel gave her. Basically, here's the reins, do something cool. And so she came up with basically the story of a wandering swordswoman in ancient feudal Japan. And all the villains have been turned into evil spirits and things like that. And so have a lot of the heroes. So instead of, you know, say Venom coming out as a symbiote, he's actually this demon of dark energy. You know, like she's kind of changed the lore behind a lot of the characters and stuff. And what's really, really cool about it is in the back of each issue, every like mythological creature or event or holiday that she like puts into the book, she puts an explanation of in the back of the book so you understand where the context came from. It's super cool, and the whole book is done with her artwork. Zach Davison has basically just helped her write a little bit and translate into English since, of course, she's from Japan.
Yeah, she's a special one. You know, I think people have really recently got on the Peach train, rightfully so, right? Like, I mean, she at New York Comic Con, her lines were like around.
Yeah, and that can be a whole other podcast episode. What she had to deal with during that was unfair and insane. But
oh yeah. But I just as far as like, and then how she handled it was amazing as well.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, but I will say like, it just goes to show that like people have really caught on to her and her creativity, and so it's nice to see. Her artwork is amazing.
And it's watercolor, which is something you don't see in comic books very often, if ever. You see oil paintings from like Alex Ross. He does a lot of like oils. You see like, you know, of course, a lot of the digital stuff nowadays where you can definitely tell it's been colored on a digital pad or something like that. But her stuff it's just different.
Yeah. It's kind of great. What's the next one? I'm gonna let you keep going because I really... You're putting me to shame, so I'm not gonna even try.
Oh, you're good, man. Let's see here. Next one I think is gonna have to be 8 Billion Genies by Charles Soule and Ryan Brown. And that it is as chaotic as the premise makes it sound. Everybody in the world gets a genie and everybody gets one wish, but it can be literally anything.
Awesome.
And you know, you ever read The Monkey's Paw? You be careful what you wish for because it can affect others around you. Mm-hmm. It's the same deal.
Yeah.
So I don't want to spoil it too much for everybody, but in the first episode, the bartender in the scene does the smartest wish out of anybody, I think, in the entire series. And he basically wishes for his bar to be a safe zone where no one else's wishes can interfere with anything inside the bar.
Oh wow.
So each issue is like 8 minutes after the genies appeared. Then the next issue is like 8 minutes after the genies appeared, and then the next one is 8 days after the genies appeared, and it keeps going, and the population of genies and humans keeps decreasing.
Oh wow, yeah. I mean, it's funny too because like that one got picked up real quick. By
Amazon swooped
Amazon.
that
Yeah,
up fast. Issue 1 was out; it got optioned like a week later.
Mhm. I mean, I will say, like, look, like we interviewed Charles Soule. And some people say Soule. I think it's Soule, but maybe I'm wrong.
I could be wrong too. I don't know.
At NYCC, and he kind of went into exactly what you went into, but it also isn't surprising. Again, we went into Peach's background and how creative and unique and different as she is. Charles the same way. I mean, the guy's for those that don't know his background, is a lawyer by trade, and I love the fact that kind of really up like Nerd Initiative's like alley. He decided he wanted to do this, and for those that don't know, like his background. I mean, he obviously did Daredevil. I mean, obviously Matt Murdock. Like it's like he wrote for Daredevil. He also wrote for She-Hulk. So those are like layups for him as a lawyer. But he also obviously did 8 Billion Genies. He did Darth Vader. He did he's done like so much. It's insane. It just keeps going on and on and on and on. But I loved his story of how he said something like 10 to 15 years ago. He said, "This is the career I want to have. I want to be, optioning." He was a consultant on She-Hulk. For those that don't know, so he was a part of that whole filming and that whole series, and I think that will help him with 8 Billion Genies and Amazon.
Yeah, that definitely gave him some production experience.
Yeah, and he is also working at like Lucasfilm as like I think he's high up as another title of they have a story group, and he's just really become like a creative like juggernaut, and it's impressive, and he's one of the best guys around on top of that. But what stuck with me is that it's not overnight, and that's the thing that I think the cautionary tale there is that even for someone that is a lawyer, so that he did how many years of schooling to get to that? And
probably 7 to 12.
and he's obviously using it because he is using it in his writing and his knowledge. And so, it's not a law degree is never going to be wasted, but I do love the fact that he was like, all right, this is what I want to do. And he got there, and it was weird because I think after 8 Billion Genie, he's really at the place he wants to be at. And so there was like a calm over him when we were interviewing him, and he was like, yeah, I've reached where I want to be. And I'm sure he'll keep
say when I was
more.
watching that interview, he just looked very content where he was sitting. Like he looked very happy with himself. Like
if you look at his I wish we had a photo. We'll pull up at some point in time. If you look at his table at an artist alley, I mean it's just an epic list of characters and titles and things that he's covered, and he really is a fan of all these things. And now he's him and Ryan are like a powerhouse creative duo, so it couldn't happen to two better people. So
for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so I think I got 2 more for my top 5s.
Yeah, let's do it.
So next one is not Something Is Killing the Children, but the spinoff House of Slaughter.
Okay.
So if you remember in the first, spoiler alert, real quick, just to let everybody know, for Something Is Killing the Children, there is a character that shows up to try and talk the main character out of doing what she's doing, like another person from her order or whatever. And basically this series follows him because he actually dies in Something Is Killing the Children, and I think issue 5.
Okay. That's interesting.
And it shows you another side of the house, like, how in Something Is Killing the Children, they have different, I guess you could call them departments, and they have different colored scarves, and each different colored scarf has a different mission that they go out and do. They have a different task or whatever. And so these spin-off series are now starting to cover all those different houses and meeting characters within those different groups rather than just following the main character around.
Yeah, I love that. I don't really have much to add to it, but I love it.
I was say I don't know how much you've read of Something's Killing the Children or anything, but
yeah, I mean, people are probably on here. We'll get some comments and be like, this guy's not up and as much as JJ on what is he doing on here. But I swear I'm a comics fan, and I've read a ton of comic books, and I know a lot of storylines.
Well, and the thing is, like, if people say that kind of stuff, it's like, just because you're not reading what's coming out right now doesn't mean you're not a fan of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean you're not willing to read stuff that's coming out right now. It's just you don't know what's coming out. So how do you know what to pick up and read?
Well, I will say it's funny, and we'll have to have like more props in the future, like things that we have.
Like first episode, you know.
Diesel Dan sent me some really great stuff, and again, like I think you guys are both so astute in what is good out there that people might know about, might not know about. You know, it's a mixture. And he sent me. He went to, I think it was LA Comic-Con, and he sent me not only a couple of like the exclusives there that I wanted to get, but he also was like, I'm gonna get you a couple of just like random things that I like. And so I appreciated that, and I think I have not checked them out yet, but I need to. And he's like, do you want me to go really crazy or crazy? And I was like, take it easy on me.
Well, because that I always tell people when they want to start getting, especially into indie stuff, I always ask them, what kind of movies do you like?
Yeah.
You know, because that's the easiest way to gain somebody's taste in what they're going to want to read, because some people can get shocked by some of the stuff that's in comic books. Like,
oh, yeah,
it's a very unfiltered art form.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially now. And I think, Boom Studios is one of those who is really pushing the envelope in a good way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, it's not just... It's kind of funny to think about how, and I think I saw a Robert Kirkman documentary on this when he was talking about Invincible, and he was talking about Walking Dead, and it's kind of funny to think there was such a long gap before it became popular, but where things were stuck in the old ways,
Mm-hmm.
and the titles are limited and not very creative, and that's why I think everybody knows the story. That's why a lot of those guys like McFarlane and Liefeld left Marvel to go to Image to really, do whatever they wanted to creatively and not just be artists. But it's interesting to think that, like, I really think we're in, people say we're in the golden age of TV. I think we're in the golden age of comics as far as like the storytelling and the content. Like, it's just
the writers and artists are starting to have a lot more control over what they get to do, which I think is a really good thing, because like, especially the writers that keep going over to Image or all these other indie publishers, like those publishers pretty much give the creators full reign.
Yeah.
As long as they're not screwing up any of the licenses that they've got with these companies. Like, Boom's got Power Rangers. They've got Something is Killing the Children. They've got a bunch of those big titles. So does IDW. But they push these indie creators and writers.
Yeah.
So, okay. Last one is another indie book, and it is Twig from Scotty Young and Kyle Strom.
Ooh.
So this one, I was not expecting what it was. The cover is what made me grab it, because I hadn't heard anything about this book yet. And basically, it's this little creature called Twig, and he is going out for his first day on the job as what they call a journeyer. And basically, he's got like this little crystal that he has to get to a certain place at a certain time to keep the world working, basically. And literally everything that can go wrong goes wrong on this first day. Like, he's late for work. His boss yells at him, which his boss is a giant mountain. That's a whole other thing. Like, it very much reminds me of like shows or movies like The Dark Crystal or The Labyrinth.
Okay.
Where it's got a bunch of weird creatures. The environment's real dark, but the main character is like just a champ through the whole dang thing.
Well, I mean, Scotty Young is a different kind of artist, and clearly a different kind of storyteller.
Yeah, because what's funny is Scotty Young is doing some of the cover art, but Kyle Strom is the main artist on this book, and Scotty's writing.
That's awesome. I mean, this is like literally this Spider-Man right here could be like out of a Scotty Young cover.
Yeah.
I mean, he essentially draws in Funkos. Like, it's kind of awesome. And so
that's a good way to put it. He draws in Funkos.
That was the first thing I noticed. And he's got, I mean, his, for people that are of, I guess, my age, who got into comics before variant covers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are
That's
somewhat of
definitely
a new
started
thing.
what in like the late '80s, early *90s.
Yeah, I mean, if you consider X-Men 1, right? It had like the 5 cover fold and like these things like that. But the real one, I mean, the real like true variant covers with like the retailer incentives. I was learning from like, some people on TikTok about that, including Bumpkins, who is also a Nerd Initiative, but other smart guy who knows a ton about
I'll say
comics.
Bumpkins was our first guest on my other podcast.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's got a really great. I think we're very similar in age and of the era and stuff. And so, but it's interesting. I mean, I love learning about that stuff. And so Scotty Young does a lot of the fun variants, that come up. So for people that don't know, how many Spider-Man 1 are there out there as far as new series?
Oh my
so
gosh.
if a new Spider-Man comes out, or Amazing Spider-Man or whatever, there might be like 8 covers. Done by a bunch of different artists. Like for example, actually,
there was one book somebody told me about the other day. It's getting ready to come out. I forget which one it is. I think it's a Batman book, but I don't know which Batman book it is. But it's got 42 variant covers.
That's gonna this is where we're getting to the. I think we're getting to the cutting out the number one of Action Comics 1 with stuff like that, like
where it's oversaturation for no reason.
That's what happened in the 90s. That's what killed comics in the 90s. So I mean, we'll end up talking about that in future episodes of like the future of like where, it's super popular right now, and it's great, for people that have liked it for so long. I've been a fan for. I mean, again, comics helped me learn to read. I know that's a very common story, but so it's great that it's popular, and we love that it's popular, and it's great that we have amazing movies and shows. I just hope you always got to think about, like we talked about, we kicked off the show by talking about the auction that's breaking like $10 million, right? And so I think you have to think about when things get super popular and saturated and carried away, what made these things valuable in the first place, right? So one thing is like, okay, like Amazing Fantasy 15, that was the last issue of a book that was canceled right afterwards. It wasn't supposed to be Spider-Man in the book at all. Stan just threw it on because he wanted to put him in there. He got his own series because that book outsold the rest of Amazing Fantasy
by a lot.
All that stuff. Yeah, it was like by 30. It was crazy. And of course, the publisher tried to take credit for Spider. Let's talk about the Spider-Man character we all love, which he hated.
Right.
And so. But that's something you can't control. Like again, like stuff that's not popular is valuable because it's rare. But I think comics became popular again. Retail incentives. There's Ultimate Fallout 4, which I have somewhere here. I try to point, it never works out. Like over there, there's a variant cover that's super rare and worth like a ton of money. And I think that's cool. So like that's something that if you were a big fan, you got it. That's great. It's just a lot rarer and scarcer than the main book. And then if you go over here, I love, I'm like Vanna White right now. There's a Peach Mocha cover of Amazing Fantasy 1000. And so I'm cool with that. And there's a bunch of different artists that did Marvel Comics 1000, Amazing Fantasy 1000.
I actually am guilty of one of the incentives. I got the Peach Momoko Virgin variant cover for Amazing Fantasy 1000, and that was one of 5,000.
Is that the one is that the one I had with the half mask, half him? Yeah, I love that. It's a great book. It's a beautiful book. So again, like that's cool, and you're featuring off different artists. So I think there's like 10 to 15, especially so Marvel Comics 1000 has a bunch. We just sent out on one of the giveaways. We sent out, I think it was. Now it's not Ryan. Is it Ryan Brown? Because I know there's a couple and they're spelled differently. So it is.
It might be Ryan Brown or Ryan North. I can't remember.
It's a Ryan Brown cover. I know it's always thought of the Ryan Brown. It's not the 8 Billion Genies artist. And so he did a variant cover that's really cool because in the background you see the heroes in the front round. It does look almost like watercolor oil, and the background of the old covers. So you have like Suspense 39, you have Amazing Fantasy 15, you have Avengers 1, like all these things. So that's cool to show off. And I think there's like 10 to 15, and that's a milestone book. But like to your point, if you're coming out with a new franchise of Batman, there must be, I mean, you gave one of the books to read, and this might be coming up as we close out the show, but one of the books to read that, in one of your recent articles was a new Miles Morales series that looks awesome. But like, again, like that's probably one of in the past like 10 years, there's so many different Spider-Man ones, and like so,
Right,
or, like,
exactly.
there's so many different Batman ones. Like those are the two most marketable characters. So if you're creating 42 covers for a Batman one or a Spider-Man one, like you are going, this is silly. Like if you're
what are
making
those covers actually worth if there's that many of them?
Yeah. So that's kind of frustrating and tough. If you're again, I think the fallback is Marvel Comics 1000, right? Like that's the book that started it all for Marvel. It wasn't even Marvel, it was Timely Comics back then.
Mm-hmm.
But like to go 1000 and feature your top artists of that genre. Like how cool would that have been in the 90s if like there was a Marvel Comics 500 or I don't know, however you want to do it, and you had like a McFarlane cover and a Liefeld cover and a Jim Lee cover and that would have been really cool. So I can appreciate that. But if you're just doing it just to start off a new series and you're just trying to sell a bunch of books and whatever, that's again, that could be a tipping point or lead to a tipping point for the hobby. And I really hope it doesn't. But like you said, the saturation and the cash cowing of the hobby is really what I remember. It's what killed it in the 90s. Like there was it X-Men? There's like 1 million copies out there of X-Men 1 or something, or Spider-Man 1.
Spawn 1.
It's crazy.
Spawn #1. I can literally go down the street. There's a comic shop over there that I do not like because I don't like the people that work there. They are the exact opposite of what you want in a comic book store when you go in there. But they have one entire long box of nothing but Spawn #1 for like $1.50.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of those books that got so mass produced that it's not worth really anything now.
Good.
Unless you've got like 15 signatures on it from everybody who ever touched the book.
Yeah, that's disappointing. So, yeah, I don't know. I hope that they're, look, we're in an. I also get the mentality. It's a business, and we're in an era that we might never get this kind of a height with everything again. Hopefully it does continue on because we love it so much.
Mm-hmm.
But things go in waves and cycles, and so
right.
Who knows? But yeah, we'll see. I mean, look, if you look in the corner of your eye, you can see I'm also there's a sneaker down there, and that's another thing that's been really saturated as of Jordan
very
became
much
hot.
so.
Yeah, and during COVID and they've been pumping, Nike's been pumping those out, and Jordan Brand's been pumping those out like there's no tomorrow. And I just hope it kind of
because they've been remaking old ones now, haven't they?
Yeah. And so we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I don't know.
All right, so for our last segment of the evening, I figured most anticipated reads for next week, since there is a new comic book day every week. For those of you who don't know, every Wednesday, new comic books hit comic book store shelves, unless you're lucky, DC on Tuesday. So first off is something from a brand new publisher. It's a brand new title that I discovered recently that I think is really going to be interesting, and it's called Coins of Judas. And it's being released by Band of Bards Comics, and it's being written and written and drawn by Travis Gibb and Tyler Carpenter. And basically it's going over it's obviously a fictional story, but it's going over the original betrayal of Judas betraying Jesus for the 30 pieces of silver. And in this story, that betrayal caused the first demons to appear on Earth. And so this family who has possession of these 30 pieces of silver has to go around and basically has been fighting this war against demons since that happened.
That's cool.
And it doesn't give you a whole lot of the story plot in the description of the book, but I was like, that sounds different. I haven't seen that explored, I don't think, ever in a comic book. So
I think people get afraid, right? Like, I think there's always the fear of, can we tackle this? And I think now that things are more open and indie labels are doing better, I think we're able to see that more often, which is good because we really shouldn't be afraid.
Well, and especially in this day and age, like I promise you, there is nothing you can make or put out or produce that someone's not going to be offended by.
Oh yeah, it's impossible.
I mean, it's literally impossible at this point.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a reset. Like again, we've talked about this on fandoms a lot and other platforms. I think there are things that need to happen, and corrections that need to happen, and movements that need to happen. But when you go to one end, you usually go too far. And so there are some things that are crazy that I won't say, but like that I've seen, whether it's at work or other things, like with, people, it's crazy, because I think, like, if you were to think about everything that's rough, like, and I'm going to make this up completely hypothetical, because everyone's dealing with something, right? And I think we're all different. We should celebrate the differences. That's the beauty of everything. But when you think about, like, if I was to say, like, reach for the stars or whatever, is someone going to get offended if they can't reach up, or if they're vertically, like, that's the thing where it's kind of like you're taking old sayings, and I think people, and I want to point out, this is a made up story, but it parallels a real life story I dealt with at work, where we were looking at a title of something, and someone said, like, this might offend people, and it was something like super, super innocuous, like, like, give it your best, give it 100%. What if you can't give it 100%? I'm like, wait, I don't, what are you talking about now? Like, like,
I get it though, for sure.
You know what I mean? And so I think, like, people do get sensitive. So I think there's nothing you can really do. So I think we're in a really big transition phase, and it needs to happen for the major things that are out there that are super important, that need to happen. But hopefully, there's some of the other things we're at least able to be human and kind of,
100%
normal. Yeah. And not be worried about saying something, if you do say something that I didn't know, like, so if, I think about friends that I have that, may have a disadvantage, or, with certain things, like whether it's hearing or seeing, I'm nearsighted. I mean, that's not anything serious, but, like,
right.
But, like, if there's something, if you can't see, or you can't hear, or whatever, if I do say something that does, my hope is that if I do say something that catches them off guard, that, that's something like a vestige of the past, that they'll explain it to me, I'll learn and listen and grow and be a better person.
Because that's the only way you can, is if somebody tells you you're wrong. So tell me I'm wrong, educate me, and now I know.
Exactly. So, and to be clear, again, not talking about major movements that are very important that need to happen. We're talking about little things, like, again, like I said, the hypothetical, like, we can't say reach for the stars anymore, because, it might offend somebody. And I'm like, wait,
some
what?
flat earther somewhere or something,
Yeah. You can't cry. Wait, can't cry over spilled milk. What if you're lactose intolerant? And it's like, whoa, stop. Like, but that's something I could see someone say. Right. So, I mean, it's like, you gotta, that needs to stop. Come on.
All right. So the other one that is my second most anticipated comic next week. Funny enough, there are no Marvel or DC books on here, and that should say something, because I'm not impressed with what Marvel and DC have been doing lately.
Okay.
Just their recent stuff. It's some of it's good, but a lot of it is just like meh. But again, that's my opinion. But anyway, so this next book is Star Trek Strange New Worlds, The Illyrian Enigma #2 from IDW. And it's being written and drawn by Kristen Bear and Megan Levins, who have both worked on previous Star Trek books before. So they've got experience handling this IP already. And what's really cool about this series is that it ties directly into the television show that's going on right now. So Season 1 just ended. This book takes place in Season 2, or in between Season 1 and 2, and then Season 2 starts as soon as this comic book run ends.
Oh, that's cool. So that reminds me. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, that reminds me. Remember, you're in a delay. I'm still watching you talk as I'm like trying. No, it's funny. It reminds me of the really great. It was Charles Soule and others that wrote and did artwork. Darth Vader, and there was a bunch of series that all fit in. I mean, again, for people that don't know, Lucasfilm has a story group, and all their platforms go into, now it's canon, right? And so the Darth Vader, I loved the Darth Vader series. I love things that fill in the gaps. I know Tony does too, Mr. Marvelite. He's
a lore buff for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. Like, we had, was it the Wakanda Files that kind of
Mhm.
had so many really cool things. I love the supporting materials. I think it's so much fun if you're a fan to kind of go in. And yeah, I keep saying this all night, but for those that don't know, the Darth Vader series, I mean, iconic moments that are now officially in the storylines where, where Darth found out that Luke was his son. Like that moment.
Yeah, it
in a
actually shows
comic
the
book.
scene.
Yeah, he's like, and the second he finds out, he's like, I'm gonna take over the galaxy with him. Like, we're gonna rule the galaxy.
And it doesn't show that moment in the movies, so it's really
No.
cool to see that exact moment in the comics, because you're like, okay, he figured out who he was between now and then and whatever. Or you think he already always knew. No, he had no clue.
So I love that stuff. So that's really cool that it goes between. And I also love the fact that it's I think IDW has been doing really great stuff with show and movie IP. I mean, they did Back to the Future too. They've done a bunch of Back to the Future.
And they just signed an extension, I believe, with their licensing agreement with Paramount, to where they still have the Star Trek franchise for a while, because they've got it's like 5 or 6 different Star Trek books going on right now, as well as like 4 or 5 different shows that are going on right now. It's insane how much Star Trek content's coming out.
It's awesome. And the last thing I'll say, it's really cool that it's 2 women working on this as creatives. That's really cool to see.
Star Trek is one of those IPs that has always been like ahead of its time as far as diversity goes. I mean, if you think back to, I'm not as familiar with the original series with William Shatner. I haven't watched it as intently as I have the other ones. But if you go all the way back to even Next Generation with Patrick Stewart and Jonathan Frakes and everybody else, and they had non-binary characters in that show. They had homosexual relationships in that show. Like that, that was in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah. Well, Kirstie Alley was on there. That was one of her first shows. And then they had a female captain. She was
Captain Janeway.
Yeah, and I have not seen, unlike you, I have not seen the movies or the original show. I respect everything they've done. I mean, I think William Shatner is one of the best. But
he's the coolest.
They've done amazing things, and for them to have back then a female captain, and she ended up being, I know this because she ended up being on Orange is the New Black. She was the Russian cook in the jail. So like, just a really cool like stuff that you see people are saying like, oh, this is their background, and she
well, and now
really
it's to the point where there is in the current series Discovery, there is a black female captain who's that main character of the show. There's a gay couple on board the ship. There's a trans couple on board the ship. Like they are way by far and away ahead of most IPs out there.
Yeah. Sadly.
But they've been like that since their origin. I mean, it's always been like that. They had back in the 60s, they had people of color inside and on screen and in major roles, and that wasn't done back then.
Well, wasn't Shatner and was it Nichelle Nichols were the first biracial on-screen kiss, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, talk about,
progressive.
Yeah, like wall breaking or glass.
Right.
Or, like
that was a big deal back then. That was huge.
Yeah. So that's it. They really do have a legacy of that, which it's funny. I knew that fact clearly, but I never thought about like them continuing and that show continuing, and they've really kind of been a bastion for what a show should be and should do, and how it should push the envelope further.
Yeah, because in Deep Space Nine, the main character was Captain Sisko, who was a black male. So, I mean, they've always tried to keep it as diverse as possible, and I think it makes sense because it's supposed to be hundreds of years in the future where humanity no longer has poverty or war or even uses money. So it's like now we have time to actually better ourselves as a species rather than fight with each other all the time, because now we don't have to worry about that.
Well, hopefully.
You hope. There's exceptions to everything, but But
what's next?
That's all I've got for this week, man.
Okay. Nice.
First episode, a little over an hour, you know, a good fair share of technical difficulties at the beginning. I think it went pretty smooth though for a first episode.
Yeah, I think it was great. Hooever watched, I appreciate the watching.
Yes, thank you very much.
I've always wanted to say this, be like, drop a like button below, hit that subscribe button too, because it helps. I think so. One of my favorite YouTubers is it helps the algorithm so much. But yeah, let us know, like, comment. Let us know what you want to see in the future.
What guests you want to see us try and get on here. What you want to see us go over. Topics for whatever.
I saw the ODPH podcast in there, and one of our really good friends who is amazing and does a lot, you know. So I love the advice and the comments in there, and so we really appreciate that kind of stuff. So you know, anything you want to say, drop in there. You know, JJ and I and future co-hosts and supporters of JJ and the show will take notice and appreciate it.
100%. And also, I want to thank the Caption Life. I want to thank Cell Phone Wallet Keys Mickey, and I also want to thank Mr. Marvelite Tony, because without those three guys, this episode would not have freaking happened.
But we had a blast. That's all that matters. I had a blast. This is great. I learned a ton, and man, this is valuable stuff that you shared. So
I hope so. That's what I'm trying to do here with this new show. So hopefully people found it informational, if nothing else.
I think so.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's it for this evening. Like he said, leave a like, subscribe, share it. Give us a comment. Let us know what you guys want to see us cover, who you want to see us try to interview, anything like that. We're up for pretty much anything if it has to do with comic books. So my name is JJ from JJ's Comic Stuff. This is Michael Rothman from Nerd Initiative and a whole bunch of other places. And we will see you guys next time.